Hunting walruses in the icy northern seas always requires patience, strength and extensive experience of fishermen who live on the harsh ocean. When the migration season begins, modern iron boats leave the port, cutting through the waves into the frigid waters where icebergs drift and cold winds cut through the skin. They use positioning equipment to search for traces of giant walruses surfacing to breathe on the surface of the water. When a signal is detected, the entire crew immediately prepares their tools, specialized spears, ropes, and carefully checked hydraulic winches. Then the boat slows down and approaches very slowly so as not to frighten the walruses. When the distance is close enough, the strongest hunters throw their spears at the target. The spears pierce through the thick skin and thick layer of fat underneath, causing the giant animal to struggle vigorously, creating white columns of water. The ropes are tied tightly to the hull, and the winches work at full capacity to hold the walrus back. The tug-of-war can last for minutes in the howling wind and the sound of metal, the kind of whistling, until the animal was exhausted. They proceeded to pull it onto the deck using a large pulley system. Its body weighing hundreds of kilograms slammed heavily onto the cold wet deck. Then the meat-cutting team immediately got to work. They used large, sharp knives to cut along the walrus's belly. The thick layer of fat and warm blood emitted steam in the cold air. Large pieces of meat were cut out decisively, divided into many different parts depending on the purpose of processing. First separating the skin and fat, then the firm muscles under the thick layer of fat. Each worker had their own task. One cut the skin, one separated the fat, one divided the meat, one checked and cleaned the internal organs. All worked in harmony on the narrow deck full of big waves. After the main meat was taken out, they continued to clean the bones, scraped off the excess parts, washed with cold seawater for temporary preservation before putting it in the freezer. The whole process had to be done very quickly because the harsh weather and waves could cause danger at any time. When the work was finished, all the crates of walrus meat were sealed and taken to the cold storage deep under the hull, where the temperature was always kept at an extremely low level, helping to preserve the quality of the meat throughout the return journey. While the deck was washed with seawater and disinfected to prepare for the next hunt, the engine roared again. The ship continued to cut through the thin ice, moving forward to find traces of another herd of walruses. The hunting and processing journey was repeated persistently. Reflecting the harsh but brave life of people existing in the vast cold sea, the following days at sea always opened up new challenges as the hunters continued their journey along the vast ice floes to find new herds of walruses. The cold grey sea surface reflected the weak sun hanging low in the sky. The dry wind made every step on the deck heavy, but the hunters still persistently observed every small movement of the water surface. Every panting sound of the walruses echoing from afar. Each time they found new traces, They prepared themselves for a dangerous confrontation. When the giant iron ship crept closer, the walrus herds often lay crowded on large patches of ice. Their fat bodies heavy, their fangs curved, their alert eyes following strange sounds. Just a small mistake would cause the whole herd to plunge into the sea and disappear. So the hunters had to choose the right time. When the distance was close enough, they threw their spears with the strongest force to pin the largest walrus. If the animal was hit by the spear on the ice surface, it would struggle violently. Sometimes flipping over the ice sheet forced the hunter to keep his balance well. The harpoon rope tightened. The winch system was activated again. The heavy body was dragged down to the edge of the ice and fell into the sea, where the ship was waiting to continue to retrieve the rope. After many minutes of struggling, the walrus was pulled onto the deck in an exhausted state. Its breathing gradually weakened. The dissection began immediately, because if delayed, the animal's body temperature would drop rapidly, making cutting and separating more difficult. The large knives continued to cut through the thick skin like a natural armor. The opaque white fat layer appeared. Underneath was a layer of dark red, nutritious meat. The sound of the knife hitting the dry bones mixed with the sound of waves crashing against the ship's side created an atmosphere that was both urgent and familiar to the crew. Blood flowed in long streaks on the deck, washed away in waves by the seawater. The meat fibers were divided evenly, classified by quality and size. The thick fat was kept to make oil. The meat was cleaned and brought to cold storage. Each internal organ was also carefully processed to avoid contamination. The workers worked tirelessly. Even their numb hands from the cold did not slow them down. When the remaining carcasses were pushed into the sea to avoid taking up deck space, they quickly cleaned their tools and prepared for the next hunt. The ship continued its journey through the vast sea of ice. The engine roared in the cold air. The workers sat down to rest inside the warm cabin, drank a few sips of hot coffee to warm their bodies. But their ears were always listening for signals from the radar detector and unusual sounds outside. Because as soon as another herd of walruses appeared, they would plunge into the survival battle between humans and nature, repeating the cycle of hunting, pulling up, dissecting and preserving. As an inevitable part of life in the wild sea of ice, as the ship went deeper into the thick ice-covered sea, the hunting work became more and more severe. Large pieces of ice continuously hit the ship's side, creating a deafening screech. But for the crew, this was just a familiar sound of life. They persistently followed the path of the drifting ice because they knew that walruses often gathered around areas with stable floating ice, where they rested between deep dives to find food. When the radar suddenly detected movement under the water, everyone immediately rushed to the deck, pulled up their scarves to fight the cold that seemed to freeze their lungs. At the end of the horizon, a large group of walruses slowly emerged. Their long, curved tusks glistening in the weak sunlight. They lay close together, their huge bodies heaving with each breath. The ship immediately slowed down, quietly approaching like a patient hunting animal. When the distance was only a few dozen meters, the group of hunters quickly got into position. The ropes were checked one last time. The sharp spearhead was raised. Then, in the rare moment of silence in the cold sea, the sound of a spear tore through the air, hitting the large walrus lying close to the edge of the ice. It let out a deep roar. The whole herd rushed into the water in chaos. The injured one slid down along the spear, creating a large column of water. The spear rope stretched as if about to break. The winch roared in an effort to hold on to the prey that was thrashing violently under the cold water. After many minutes of struggling, the entire body of the walrus was slowly pulled to the surface of the water. Its breathing was heavy. Its large eyes were full of despair. When it was pulled onto the deck, its heavy body slammed against the deck so hard that the whole side shook. But no one had time to hesitate. The meat-cutting team immediately rushed to their work. They used a large blade to make a long cut from the chest to the belly. The thick skin was peeled off in heavy pieces. The fat, several dozen centimeters thick, was cut into large pieces. The warm blood evaporated into thin smoke in the cold air. Below was a layer of firm muscle that was neatly separated and placed immediately in a container. Every step had to be quick, efficient and precise. Because the colder it was, the easier it was for the meat to freeze, making the dissection more difficult. The workers even had to pour cold seawater on their knives to prevent the grease from sticking and causing problems. When the organs were removed and sorted, each worker would check for any impurities or signs of damage. Then wash them with seawater before putting them in the storage tanks. The bones and leftovers were pushed into the sea to avoid cluttering the area. The heavy barrels of meat were carried by 2 people to the cold storage, where the cold air from the deep freezing system blew like white mist, helping to keep the meat in perfect condition. The deck was washed again with a pressure hose, sweeping away all the remaining blood and debris, to prepare for the next hunt. Because on this icy sea, every long stop was a lost opportunity. The crew returned to their positions, their eyes on the distant white ice line, where the slowly moving shadows could be a sign of a new walrus herd. And the journey hunting, butchering, preserving continued to revolve like the heartbeat of their lives in the vast cold sea and sky. The deeper they went into the Arctic Sea, the more fierce the challenges the crew faced became. Strong winds whipped into waves against the ship's side. forcing the giant ship to tilt. The sea surface was as cold as ice. But the walrus hunting work could not stop. Because the migration season only lasted for a short period of time. If they missed it, they would lose their most important source of income of the year. Therefore, each sailor kept their eyes open, their hands tightly gripping the cold metal railing, their ears listening to every small sound in the vast space. Then a heavy sigh from an animal in the distance echoed, signaling the appearance of another herd of walruses. Immediately, the crew took position. The ship slowed down, gliding slowly through the thin layer of ice. The white tusks of the walruses protruded from the water like curved pillars. Each one weighed hundreds of kilograms and was lying on a large patch of ice to rest. Just one loud noise was enough to make the whole herd panic and flee into the sea. Therefore, every movement of the crew was made by the walruses. The hunter must be absolutely precise. When the boat approaches the ice sheet, the strongest worker stands on the edge of the deck, firmly holding the sharp spear, carefully observing every movement of the largest walrus. Then suddenly throws the spear with force like an arrow. The spear tip pierces through the thick skin. The animal immediately rises up, slithers strongly, causing the entire ice sheet to tilt. It roars a deep roar that seems to resonate throughout the space. Seawater splashes as it dives down. The harpoon rope tightens and stretches as if about to break. The winch is working at full capacity again. The ship shakes with each strong thrashing of the giant animal. After minutes of heavy struggle, the walrus's massive body is slowly pulled to the surface of the water. Cold water drips from its body onto the deck as it is lifted. And as soon as the heavy body hits the deck, the dissection begins again without a second's delay. The thick skin is slashed with strong knife strokes. Each ivory white fat is separated like soft blocks of stone. The smell of fresh meat mixes with the cold wind and rises in waves. The butcher uses large knives were used to cut deep into the dark muscle. Divided into large blocks and quickly put into containers. The organs were pulled out, inspected and washed with seawater to remove blood and impurities. Each heavy box of meat was transferred to the deep cold storage, where the cold air blew like mist. While on the deck, the remaining men poured seawater onto the floor, washing away the blood, fat and remaining debris, preparing for the next hunt. When everything was just finished, the siren from the cabin sounded again, signaling that the radar had detected more movement. New dark figures appeared under the cold mist in the distance, and the crew, though tired and with numb hands, immediately stood up, ready to repeat the endless cycle of hunting in the vast icy sea, where only the most resilient people could survive. Not long after the hunt was over, the sky became darker, heavy clouds rolled in, signaling a snowstorm that could strike at any moment. But the crew still couldn't stop. because every walrus herd that appeared on the radar was a precious opportunity. The whistle from the cabin sounded again, causing everyone to rush out onto the deck, despite the cold wind that whipped their faces, stinging like needles. In the distance, large black shadows were moving in the still water. Then each curved white tusk gradually became clearer as they approached. The walrus herd this time was larger and more alert. They were huddled together on a large block of ice, their heads held high, breathing long breaths that emitted white smoke into the cold air. Just one wrong beat, the whole herd would simultaneously hide under the dark ice. So the hunter in charge had to calculate very precisely when the ship was close enough but had not caused strong fluctuations. The hunter bent down, his hands tightly gripping the handle of the spear, observing the largest male lying close to the edge of the ice. Then he threw the spear with all his might. The spearhead twisted into the thick skin, causing the walrus to bounce up. A low, dull roar rang out, shaking the ice. The whole herd was in chaos. The remaining ones dove into the water, leaving one pinned down by the spearhead and the steel cable. It slithered strongly, sliding on the ice creating a long trail, then fell into the sea with a loud noise. The harpoon rope stretched as if about to burst. The winch roared, dragging the animal through the cold water. Each of its last strong struggles made the deck shake, until the giant body was completely lifted up. Seawater flowed from its body onto the steel floor, and when the body weighing hundreds of kilograms hit the deck, everything returned to a familiar but urgent rhythm. The butchers immediately rushed over. No one said a word. They only focused on the movement of the blade. Each strong incision went deep through the thick skin like natural armor. Hot blood spurted out but immediately cooled in the cold wind. The layer of fat several dozen centimeters thick was cut into large blocks, each so heavy that it took 2 people to lift them into the bins. The dark red flesh underneath was precisely cut into blocks, then washed in cold seawater to remove the residue, then transferred to deep freezing. The organs were removed, carefully sorted. The fresh and clean parts were kept. The unusable parts were immediately pushed into the sea to avoid crowding the deck. The seawater was ready to continue the endless cycle of their lives, hunting, pulling, butchering, preserving, as if the ice itself had molded them into brave men. Stubborn, strong and never back down in the face of harsh nature. The wind began to howl harder, whipping the deck in gusts as if it wanted to blow away the people standing on it. Approaching, the captain still decided to try to hunt one more time before turning around to avoid the storm, because each herd of walrus was an important source of food and income that they could not miss. The ship continued to glide in the biting cold. The lights on the deck penetrated the thick snow, gradually illuminating the curved tusks peeking out from the fog. This time the herd of walruses was much larger and more numerous. They lay crowded together on the grey ice, breathing long breaths that could be heard cutting through the air. The hunter quickly got into position, mind, hands numb with cold but still gripping the handle of the harpoon tightly. When the ship was close enough, he held his breath, aimed carefully at the largest male walrus lying on the edge of the ice, then jerked his arm and launched a powerful charge that caused his body to lean forward slightly. The tip of the harpoon pierced the target. The walrus jumped up, slithered strongly, causing the entire ice to sway. It roared a deep roar that echoed far and wide in the snowy sea, causing the whole herd to panic and rush into the water. The harpoon rope was taut, shaking violently under the strong pulling force. The winch was immediately activated. The sound of metal friction rang out loudly. Cold steam rose from the rope as it was stretched to the limit. The walrus rushed around under the water, trying to find a way to escape. But each turn was held tightly by the ship. After minutes of fierce struggle, it gradually weakened. Its huge body was pulled to the surface of the water in the whistling wind, then slowly lifted from the cold foamy sea. Water dripping from its thick layer of fat. Its breath was heavy as a stone pressing down. When the heavy body slammed down on the deck, everyone immediately rolled up their sleeves and began their familiar work. Large knives cut through the thick skin while their bodies were still shivering from the cold. The ivory white fat separated into large chunks. Hot blood evaporated thinly, creating a pale red mist in the cold air. The butcher used force to cut deep into the dark red muscle underneath, dividing each chunk into a container to avoid freezing too quickly. The internal organs were pulled out, sorted and cleaned with cold sea water, and the excess parts were pushed into the sea to avoid taking up space on the deck. The snow began to fall thicker. Each large drop whipped against the cold floor. But the crew still worked continuously. Each person used seawater to clean the deck, washing away the blood and fat to prepare for the next hunt. Even though everyone knew that the time left before the storm hit was very little,